Hello and welcome to the 102nd episode of Worldly Wise, the Federal's weekly program on geopolitical developments with our consulting editor K.S. Dakshina, a specialist in world affairs. This week's episode is about the West Asia War. Where is the war headed? The region remains stuck in a high stakes deadlock involving military strikes, economic blockades, and fragile diplomacy. Is there any hope of an end to the conflict soon? Let's dive right into the conversation. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you.
Yes. So my first question is, according to the latest developments, US commanders are pushing for intense strikes to force Iran surrender. There are signs of the war expanding. President Donald Trump remains caught between launching heavier attacks and global economic fallout. Given all this, can an all-out US campaign actually succeed, or are we seeing the limits of military force here?
Well, to begin with, we have seen an all-out campaign. For instance, when it began on February 28th, when Israel and the US started attacking Iran, this was not only, this was the second phase. I mean, the first phase of the attacks happened last year in June. So this was the second phase, and for nearly a month, I think they really went all out, attacking Iran's military strikes on crucial nuclear facilities, on civilian infrastructure, in fact, including the assassination of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. So the US has done that. So the US has already done heavy bombardment along with Israel. And when it realized that it was not heading anywhere, because number one, Iran retaliated in a manner that was completely unexpected. It was beyond Trump's and Netanyahu's planning. And and Iran also retaliated in an unconventional manner. Some people even call it a guerrilla kind of a system where you do something which is completely unconventional. So they, for instance, blockaded the Strait of Hormuz. Then, secondly, they attacked neighboring countries in the Gulf region, wherever U.S. military bases and wherever U.S. Places of U.S. interest, or wherever the U.S. was had its interest there. So all these were targeted by Iran, which completely took Trump by surprise. So then gradually the realization dawned that it was not heading anywhere. And Iran had the stomach to take in all these strikes. Because initially the feeling also, if you remember, was that Trump and Netanyahu thought that once Khamenei was removed, there would be something called, what they termed as regime change. But even that did not happen, because Iran has a far more robust political structure than was known or anticipated, or in fact, completely misjudged, I would say, by the US and Iran. So you had a ceasefire, or an MOU that was talked about, and then the MOU was signed after a month or so, and then negotiations began. And what has happened is, since then, the negotiations haven't worked. Now, why hasn't the negotiations worked? It's again because the US is not negotiating fairly. That's the impression one gets. Because if you look at the reaction of Iran to the negotiations, Iran says that the Americans are trying to arm twist them into a deal. Now, the Iranian leadership says, sorry, that is not how it goes. It has to be a fair deal. And so what has happened since then is, even the negotiations, that's the reason they haven't succeeded. If you recollect, for a short while, the Strait of Hormuz became free. When the MOU was signed, Iran let it free, and the US was supposed to back off from the blockade. And the negotiation started. It looks like then the Iranians realized that not having the Strait of Hormuz, or blocking the Strait of Hormuz, was a mistake, because Iran did not have a leverage anymore, and Trump and the US, the team was using that to bulldoze Iran into signing an agreement which they were not willing. So that is the reason why again the Strait of Hormuz got blockaded by Iran, and the US also returned to the the larger blockade of the Persian Gulf, and that is how it has continued, and it has dragged on. So each time there is a problem within the negotiation, you have strikes that you see outside. Each one, especially the US, hoping that by again attacking Iran, it would bend or it will bow down to the US diktat. But Iran has very clearly said no, that is not possible. So this has been going on for the last 6 months. Okay, so and if you take the last few days, there has been a sudden kind of a expansion. Saudi Arabia has got into it. The Houthis who are allies of Iran in Yemen, they have got into the conflict. So what it has basically done is it has expanded the canvas of the war. So you had in Iraq, which is a neighbor of Iran, there are Iranian groups in Iraq or who are sympathetic to Iran. So if you take these groups, they have been also been supporting or backing Iran by occasionally striking US targets. So what they did this time is they attacked a Saudi oil terminal. So the Saudis retaliated by, for the first time, directly getting into the war by striking these Iraqi targets along with the US. As far as the Houthis are concerned, they have now said that they are going to blockade the Bab el Mandeb Strait, which is very similar to the Strait of Hormuz, but on the western side, on the Red Sea side. So, and that's also an extremely crucial strait because oil and flows from comes through the Europe Suez Canal, and then it comes into the Indian Ocean, which is also crucial for India. So they have now threatened to blockade it. The blockade is not yet fully in force, but they have threatened to do that. So it is expanding. There is no sign that negotiations are heading anywhere. Then the reason for that is there is no fair play within the negotiation. The US is trying to impose its will on Iran, and that's the impression that one gets by looking closely at what's happening there.
Yes, sir. Sir, you mentioned about the Strait of Hormuz. So, with diplomacy stalled and energy prices rising, is this messy stalemate in the Strait of Hormuz simply becoming the new normal?
Well, there is a big danger that this could end up being a new normal in the sense that Iran, which until the war, the military strikes, the US Iran military strike started on February 28th. Now, until February 28th, the Strait of Hormuz has not been was never blockaded by Iran in modern times, at least. In the past, there have been instances when it has been used, but that's too far back in history. So, in recent times, the Strait of Hormuz was not at all an issue. The main issue was the Iran's nuclear program, which both Israel and the US wanted Iran to end, and on their terms. So Iran said, sorry, we cannot do that. And that's how these negotiations were already going on when the US and Israel struck Iran. And Iran suddenly realized that the Strait of Hormuz, it has been threatening in the past that it will block the strait and all that, but it has never done that so far. So when they blocked the strait, it realized it was a great trump card for Iran. And it made the rest of the world sit up, including India, Southeast Asia, China, all these big countries, Europe. All of them suddenly realized that it is affecting the world economy by what Iran did. Even the Americans were completely taken aback because they didn't expect this. Now, it's now the potential of the Strait of Hormuz has been realized by Iran, and Iran does not want to let go. Okay, now what Iran is saying is that we are going to continue in some way to regulate the flow of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. There may not be a blockade. What Iran will do is, allow friendly countries to pass through the strait, ships from friendly countries. And it also is trying to negotiate with Oman, which is the Strait of Hormuz is between Oman and Iran. To the south is Oman, and to the north is Iran. And you have the Strait of Hormuz. It's a very narrow strait, and the shortest distance is just 30 kilometers from Iran and Oman. So they are also trying to work out some kind of an agreement by which they regulate the flow of traffic. So it looks like the Strait of Hormuz is not going to return to the past, to the pre-February 28th situation where it was completely free, no regulation, absolutely nothing. It was free shipping. The irony of the whole thing is that this goes against the International Convention on the Law of Seas, or the Law of Seas as it's called. And it is as per the international law on the seas, nobody has the right to blockade or charge fees in international waters, and especially where international shipping is through. But both Iran and the US are not signatories to this convention, so they are not obliged to go by that. And anyway, now that the war is continuing, we don't know when the war is going to end. And even if the war ends, this Strait of Hormuz is not going to be the same ever again. But what it has basically done is the rest of the world, particularly Southeast Asia, Japan, China, and of course India, have realized that they cannot anymore depend on their oil supplies from this region. So they are also kind of making alternative arrangements. In that sense, yes, there is a very big chance that the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is the new normal. So we don't know for how long, but as of now, that's how it looks like.
Sir, I would like to know about the impact on India in detail. How badly is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz hitting India's energy imports and domestic economy?
Well, when the war started, the strikes began. Obviously, India, like all countries, even China, India, all these countries were badly affected because around 40% of India's oil supplies come through this Strait of Hormuz, and so obviously it's a huge amount. But what India did, fortunately, was it had Russia, and Russia stepped in. And Russia had already been supplying oil to India since the time of the Russia-Ukraine war, which began in 2022. That is 4 years ago. In February 2022, you had the Russia attacking Ukraine, and so since that war happened, the Americans and Europe, they imposed sanctions on Russia. And India, in some ways, helped Russia by procuring oil from them, defying the sanctions. So, and it was going on, and just before this war started, India had kind of slowly it was trying to reduce its procurement of oil from Russia under US pressure, because the US said that it's going to impose sanctions on India, tariffs, etc., if it continued buying oil from Russia. So India had reluctantly started reducing its procurement of oil when this war happened. Now, when this happened, India again was forced to look again at Russia, and Russia obliged India. To a large extent, it helped. So that was one big, move that India made, and that is how India also somehow managed to avert a crisis, both the LPG and fuel. But the larger issues remain. For instance, the petrochemical industries in the Gulf, they supply oil, but much of this byproducts of petrochemical, are also used for fertilizers, for pharmaceuticals, and it's going to affect the entire world. So we are only looking at oil, but it also has wider implications. So there were fears that the Indian farmers or the farmers around the world would not have enough fertilizer to grow the next crop and all that. Thankfully, the MOU was signed. And since the MOU has been signed, though the war is continuing, it is not with the same intensity that existed before the MOU was signed. So the first nearly a month, for instance, from February 28th till about April 8th, this was the period, duration, when the bombing and the attacks were very severe. But since then, the MOU was signed, so the ceasefire was declared, the MOU was signed, and since then, it's kind of been there on and off, but it's not to the same intensity. The only worrying thing now is the Bab el Mandeb Strait is also, there is a threat to close it. But what has India in the meantime done is India has consciously diversified its sourcing of oil fundamentally, and the LPG from South American countries. For instance, it's now getting oil and LPG from Venezuela, from even from the US itself, and Brazil. So these are the countries in which India has now expanded to. And so, in fact, according to certain reports, there are at least 40 different sources that India is looking at. Plus, India is also continuing to buy oil from Iran itself, though at a much reduced price. So, if you look at it in totality, there is a pipeline that runs from the UAE through Saudi Arabia. Okay, so this pipeline to some extent has neutralized the dependence on shipping. So this pipeline, which runs from UAE to the Red Sea, actually from the Red Sea to UAE, it has in some ways helped reduce the impact of this. But the every day 20 million barrels of oil is you used to be shipped through the strait, but this pipeline can I think is possible, can accommodate about 6 million per day. So there is still a shortfall, but they're still trying many ways to beef it up and make it better. But now the Babel Mandeb Strait, the threat there can be difficult. It can make the situation difficult for all countries, including India, China, and all that. So India, in that sense, what India has also done is internally it has tried to attempt to increase its strategic reserves of oil, and it has also made modifications. It has also asked the refiners in India to make modifications to be able to accommodate any kind of oil that India buys. So diversify, because oil from different parts of the world are different in character. Like the oil from Russia is different from the one that you get from the Gulf. So India is more attuned to the oil that comes from the Gulf. So now they're modifying it to be able to refine even oil from other countries like say Venezuela, Russia, which are different in character. So India is also been pretty actively engaged in diversifying, and like China, for instance, China is also doing the same thing. So it's a kind of a game changer in that sense. No, the dependence on this particular region for oil, it's not going to be the same again. But so far, India has managed, and the fact that the war is again not on a full scale, though it's continuing, it's not like when it began. So that, in some ways, one can say gives some hope. Plus, the intensity also is not that much, because on paper the ceasefire still continues. It's just that it's called a violation of a ceasefire than a resumption of the war. So it's even the terminology is a little different. So that's how it is, and this is how India is also managing its fuel supplies.
How is New Delhi managing to balance its relationship with the Washington, Iran, Israel, and the Gulf as this war drags on?
See, India, if you take compared to say, if you look at Pakistan, Pakistan has played a huge role in the mediation efforts along with Saudi, Egypt, Turkey. So they have played a huge role in, and it's going on right now. They're still in the process of mediation between the two uh, fighting parties. As far as India is concerned, India has kept off actively being engaged in any of these activities. It's also it's the policy of the government whether it was the right thing to do or not, whether India should have got into the mediation or not is a different question. But the fact of the matter is, as we speak today, India is not actively engaged in any of these activities, because India is really concerned about its fundamental survival, like in terms of getting fuel and all the other important elements like LPG, LNG, and it's trying to very hard to ensure that this shortage does not affect life in India, which can in turn be very bad for the government. It will be tough for the government to deal with shortages and a crisis, so etc. So India is more bothered about some kind of a firefighting. At the same time, if you take India's relationship with the various countries, to begin with, India had got much closer to Israel, which it continues to have. It also had a relationship with Iran, which is a pretty good relationship. But of course, it's not. It was a little ups and downs were there occasionally, and India has managed to also keep the lines open with Iran, and especially and with the Americans. Though definitely India has tried to maintain some semblance of a good relationship. In fact, as we speak, the negotiations on the U.S. trade deal is still on. There is a kind of a back and forth that is going on. So what India has managed to do is it has managed to continue to have some kind of a relationship with all the countries which are in the conflict. Now, but the point here is that it is not as easy as what we think, because, for instance, now the U.S. in fact is on the verge of passing a law uh, which is going to impose penalties of 100% tariffs on countries which are buying oil from Iran and from Russia. And India is doing both, and much more from Russia than Iran, but from both countries. So the US is this particular law is meant to target China and India, which are two among the two biggest buyers of oil. Whether India can use its diplomacy with the US to somehow dilute it, or make sure that it is kept aside, all that, it will depend on how the Indian Foreign Ministry and the Indian government deals with the US, because the penalty is 100%, and in terms of the tariffs for any kind of trading that happens between the two countries, and it's going to become very difficult if it is actually imposed on India. So there is a huge looming challenge that is in front of New Delhi. If India bows down to this sanctions and decides not to buy oil from Russia, then there's going to be a huge problem internally for India, as we spoke earlier. So India is in some sense caught in a kind of a tricky situation, and it would need everything in its diplomatic arsenal to figure out a way of dealing with it. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's going to be pretty difficult. And there can be occasions when India will be forced to take a stand. Either they support Iran, or they support the US or Israel. In fact, when the war began, just to recollect, when the Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in Israel 2 days before the war started, so that itself was kind of seen as a negative. And then when Ayatollah Khamenei was assassinated, there was no condolence from the Prime Minister. And after a few days, it was somebody in the foreign ministry who expressed condolence. So these are things that a little bit of you had a problem, but since then India has realized that it is not in its interest to side with any one side. So since then they have been trying to play it more, balance it in a much better way. And also, India has realized in its statements to the UN, as far as the Palestinian issue is concerned, and they have been more sympathetic to the Arab world and to Iran, and broadly trying to give the message that they are not really leaning on any one side. So it is that kind of situation exists as of today. But how it proceeds further, especially in the light of the impending sanctions, we have to see.
Thank you, sir. And viewers, watch the same space on Thursdays 8 p.m. for such analysis on geopolitical happenings.